The squirrels in your yard do strange things every single day. You probably laugh at them. You point them out to whoever's in the kitchen, you record a video on your phone, and the squirrel goes on with whatever it was doing as if you were not even there. But what most people never realize is that almost every one of those small, strange, often funny behaviors is a specific communication, a precise calculation, or a piece of survival logic running in the background of an animal whose mental life is far more deliberate than most observers give it credit for. Here are 7 strange behaviors the squirrels in your yard do, and what they actually mean. Start with the one most people see every single day and have never once stopped to wonder about: the tail. You walk outside, a squirrel is on the fence, the tail snaps once, then again, then once more, in a pattern that feels almost deliberate. Most people register it as nothing, a tick, a twitch, a piece of nervous energy. But that flicking tail is one of the most complex pieces of communication in the squirrel's body, and almost every flick is directed at something specific in its environment. Often that something is you. Robert McCleary at the University of Florida and other researchers working on Squirrels carolinensis have documented that gray squirrels use tail flagging as a multi-purpose signal. The same flick can mean different things depending on speed, direction, and what is happening in the rest of the body. A slow, large arc of the tail is a low-level, "I see you, I am watching" signal. A rapid series of sharp flicks is closer to a warning broadcast, intended not just for you but for any other squirrels within visual range. And when the flicks are tight, contained, and directed at a specific point in space, the bowl, the doorway, the path you usually walk, that is a squirrel actively communicating about something it wants attention drawn to. But here's the layer almost no one notices. The squirrels who tail flick at you the most are the squirrels who are most familiar with you. The animal that has decided you are part of the yard will signal to you the way it signals to another squirrel, by flicking in your direction, expecting you to register the flick, and adjusting its behavior based on whether you do. And if you think tail flicking is loaded with meaning, wait until you see the 7th behavior on this list. What a squirrel does with its eyes says something almost nobody learns to recognize. We will get to that one at the end. Then there is the one almost every backyard observer notices but few stop to ask about: the freeze. You are watching the yard. A squirrel is running along the top of the fence at full speed, and then, without warning, the squirrel stops, mid-stride, locked into a pose that looks almost theatrical, one front paw raised, head fixed in one direction, tail rigid behind it. The squirrel does not blink. The squirrel does not breathe in any visible way. The pose holds for 10 seconds, sometimes 30, sometimes more, and then, just as abruptly, the squirrel unlocks and continues whatever it was doing. What you are watching is one of the oldest survival behaviors in the mammalian playbook. Gray squirrels, like most small mammals, evolved as prey for both terrestrial and aerial predators. The hawks and owls that hunt them rely heavily on movement detection. Their visual systems are optimized to pick out the small motions of a fleeing animal against the background. A squirrel that stops moving entirely becomes, for a moment, nearly invisible to the predators most likely to kill it. The freeze is not panic. It is a deliberate, calculated, learned response to a specific stimulus the squirrel has just detected. That stimulus might be a shadow that crossed the lawn at the wrong angle. It might be the distant call of a Cooper's hawk. It might be your own movement at the kitchen window, registered out of the corner of the squirrel's 300-degree visual field. Whatever it was, the squirrel made a split-second risk calculation and chose stillness over flight. When you see a squirrel freeze, you are not watching an animal that has malfunctioned. You are watching a survival routine that has kept its lineage alive across 30 million years of being something larger animals wanted to eat. Then there is the behavior almost every squirrel does, almost every day, that nobody ever questions: the rotating eat. A squirrel finds a nut. It picks the nut up in both front paws. It sits back on its haunches, brings the nut close to its face, and begins to rotate it. The nut spins in the squirrel's paws as if mounted on an invisible axis, while the squirrel's teeth work the shell at one consistent point. You have watched this dozens of times. Most people assume the rotation is just how the squirrel happens to chew. It is not. The rotation is engineering. A squirrel's incisors grow continuously throughout its life, and the angle at which they cut a shell is highly specific. The hardest, most efficient bite for opening a nut comes when the lower incisors meet the shell at one precise point, with all the force of the squirrel's bite directed through that single spot. The animal cannot move its jaw freely the way a chewing herbivore can. So instead of moving the jaw to find the right angle, the squirrel moves the nut. The rotation lets the squirrel hold the bite angle constant while shifting which part of the shell is being worked on. Each turn of the nut places a fresh, weak point under the incisor. Over a few seconds, this rotational gnawing carves a precise groove all the way around the shell, after which the nut splits cleanly along the line. You're not watching an animal play with its food. You are watching the most efficient nut-opening mechanism that has ever evolved in a small mammal. The squirrel is running a manufacturing process. Then there is the one that always makes people laugh, the splute. You walk outside on a hot afternoon and there is a squirrel lying completely flat on a branch, on a wooden fence rail, or on the cool concrete of a patio step. All four legs are stretched out behind and beside its body. The tail is loose. The belly is pressed flat to the surface. The squirrel looks like it has melted. Most people assume the splute is just a goofy resting pose. It is not. It is thermal regulation. A squirrel cannot sweat. Squirrels lack the eccrine sweat glands distributed across the skin that allow humans to dump heat through evaporation. On a hot day, a squirrel has only a few options for shedding excess body heat. It can pant, it can retreat to shade, it can lick its own fur and let the saliva evaporate. Or it can find a surface cooler than its body and press the largest possible area of itself flat against that surface. The splute is the last option. The squirrel is using the patio stone or the shaded branch as a heat sink, conducting warmth out of its body and into the cooler material beneath it. The flatter the squirrel can get, the more skin is in contact, the faster heat moves out of the body. The pose looks ridiculous because it is purpose-built. Every aspect of the position has been optimized for one job: getting the squirrel's core temperature down before heat stroke becomes a real risk. Then there is the one that sounds the strangest of all, the chatter. A squirrel, usually high in a tree, sometimes from the top of a fence post, lets out a rapid series of staccato sounds. Cook, cook, cook. Sometimes lower and more guttural, sometimes sharp and almost mechanical, often combined with rapid tail flicks. People who hear it the first time often think the squirrel is making fun of them. It is not. The squirrel is telling every other animal in earshot exactly what it sees. Robert Leshak at Auburn University spent years cataloging gray squirrel vocalizations and showed that the species has a real, structured alarm vocabulary. The sharp cucks are typically used for ground predators: cats, dogs, foxes, raccoons. The lower, drawn-out quas are used more often for aerial threats, particularly hawks. Modulated versions of each call communicate distance and direction. The chattering you hear from a high branch is not random noise. It is targeted, specific, and broadcast for an audience. The audience is every other squirrel within earshot. When one squirrel sounds an alarm, the squirrels in adjacent territories often pause, freeze, or move to cover within seconds. The information passes through the local population the same way a warning passes through a flock of birds. Your yard's chatter is part of a network of overlapping alert zones that extend across the entire neighborhood. And here's the part most people miss. If a squirrel in your yard is chattering at you specifically, locked onto you, flicking the tail, sustaining the call, that squirrel has classified you in real time as a threat worth broadcasting about. Then there is the moment that always looks comical from the outside, the puff. A squirrel is on the fence. Suddenly, with no audible warning, the tail goes from its normal sleek profile to a fluffed-out fan, nearly twice its resting width. The fur stands straight out from the tailbone. The squirrel's body language changes. It is taller, broader, more solid, and if you are close enough to watch carefully, the rest of its coat may also be standing slightly more upright than it was a moment before. This is piloerection. It is the same biological process as a cat's hackles going up, or the hair on the back of a human's neck standing during fear. The smooth muscles attached to each hair shaft contract, forcing the fur to stand on end and dramatically increasing the apparent size of the animal. For a squirrel, this serves two specific purposes. The first is intimidation. A puffed squirrel looks substantially larger than its actual size, which can deter rival squirrels in territorial confrontations and may cause hesitation in some predators long enough for the squirrel to escape. The second is thermoregulation in cold weather. The puffed coat traps more air close to the body and insulates better. But on a warm day, when a squirrel suddenly puffs its tail at you, the message is not about temperature. The message is that this squirrel has decided to look as big as it possibly can because something just happened that it is preparing to face down. It looks ridiculous. It is also, in its own small way, very serious. Which brings us to the seventh behavior, the one that pays off the promise from the first. The squirrel that watches you without alarm. Remember when I said that what a squirrel does with its eyes says something almost nobody learns to recognize? This is it. You walk into the yard. A squirrel is on the deck rail, on the low branch, on the fence post 6 feet away. The squirrel sees you. Every reflex in its body, every instinct refined across 30 million years of being prey for creatures of your size, is built to make it run. The tail should flick, the body should tense, the animal should flee. It does not. It stays. It watches you, not with the sharp, predator-scanning stare of a frightened squirrel preparing to bolt. With a soft, steady, neutral gaze. The eyes are open, the body is relaxed, the tail hangs loose behind it. The squirrel is registering your presence in real time and choosing actively, deliberately, against its own evolutionary instructions not to react. This is, without exaggeration, the rarest signal a wild squirrel can give a human being. In every other context, sustained calm visual attention between a squirrel and a creature your size is what happens in the final moment before an attack on the squirrel begins. The squirrel that holds your gaze and does not flee has, somewhere in months or years of accumulated experience, classified you correctly. As predator-shaped but not predator-behaving, as trustworthy, as something it does not have to run from. It will never come close to you the way a pet does. It will never let you touch it the way a dog does. But the squirrel that watches you across the yard with soft eyes and a loose tail, while every other creature its size in the neighborhood would have already vanished into the canopy, has chosen you. And that quiet, unblinking gaze, more than any chatter or flick or freeze, is the loudest thing a squirrel in your yard will ever say.